Hello and welcome, I'm Kira Scrivener, and today I'm going to be doing the predictions for the Women's Prize. I'm really excited for this. I have really enjoyed following along it. I have read 9 of the 16 books, and I am first of all going to go through my rankings of the list, talking a little bit about the books I have not read. I will address those. Then I'm going to give my personal list, some of my controversial thoughts on how I think that it might turn out, and then I will at the end give my predictions of how I think that it's actually going to turn out. So I'm really excited for this. I cannot wait till the early morning on Wednesday for me to figure out. I think it's 7 a.m. British time, and there's a part of me that really wants to like stay up till I think that's 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in Canada and be like, but I feel like that's self-destructive behavior, which would work with a lot of the heroines in these books, but you know, probably not behavior that I should model. So beginning at the bottom of the list, I have Memphis. I DNF'd this. It is a book I could be persuaded to go back to, but I just did not feel particularly called to it. It seemed very tragic-y porn, and I was going through a hard time at the time, and I was just like, I don't have the capacity for this. So if it was shortlisted, I would pick it up again. I believe so. And then we have Dog of the North. This is a book that I just really didn't like. I didn't like the fact that it talked about all of these things, but it didn't actually talk about these things, and then the ending and stuff really just left everything open, and not in a consuming way, more just in a I don't really know way. And yeah, I didn't love it. I've heard really mixed things. Then like way up we have Trespasses. Trespasses is a book I was probably most excited about on the list, and I really thought I would love it, and I just failed to connect with the characters. I'm really excited for what Louise Kennedy writes next because she's a debut author, and this is something that she personally could relate to and stuff like that. She grew up during the Troubles, and I'm really interested in her story and stuff. I felt like I was distanced from the characters, and that a lot of the characters had events and conversations that were zipped over in ways in which we didn't actually get to, we were more told than we actually experienced the stories. So I wouldn't be sad if she was recognized for her work, but not necessarily progressed further. I also have Cursed Bread. This is a book I have a whole review on because I have such complicated thoughts. I find it so fun because everyone who commented was like, oh, you kind of changed my mind because you're very positive about this book. And I was like, was I really positive about this book? I feel like this is a book that I left confused in, but in a good way. I had trouble connecting with the characters and stuff like that, and feeling the writing a little bit too saccharine, but then as we hit the end, her dreamlike style really meant into the menace and to these really detailed descriptions of not gore, but just this poisoning and the effects of it, and hallucinations, and how do people actually interact. And there's so many questions, and I don't know, I don't think I would like want to reread it because it was kind of miserable to get through, and yet I really enjoyed like thinking about it. And like when people comment about it, I'm like, yes, I have so many questions, I want to talk about it. So I don't know, I would find it fun if this was shortlisted because I want to talk about it more. Do I want to read it? I don't know. And then Glory. I feel like this has a disadvantage because I read it way back in August for the Booker Prize, and to me it feels like it's kind of run its course. Like, it was so fun to talk about in the Booker Prize season, but like, I don't know, I read it so much longer before these books, so I don't have as much fresh memories about it. I did really enjoy it. It is another book that I started out disliking, and then I actually understood it more near the end and really enjoyed the repetition and the ways in which she plays with characters and theme. I don't think it's a perfect novel, and I honestly don't see it as part of the shortlist simply because I feel like it has already had its chance and it had such an interesting story, and I think other books on this list play with similar themes in ways that are new and different than this book that can be addressed in different things. But I do kind of hate the hate against it because I do think that it gets misaligned for being animals or being compared to Animal Farm, and I just feel like that's not fair. It's a book that stands on its own and makes no references to those in themselves, so I think that the fact that they're animals has some greater themes in regards to, I guess, herd mortality and stuff like that work. However, the actual being characters and stuff like that, they're humans, they're just talked about in animal things, you know what I mean? Like, it's not that deep, I guess. It's how I feel when people get really angry about them being animals, because you could pretend like they're not animals and it wouldn't actually affect the plot of it at all. Talking about other books that I thought that dealt really well with patriarchy and sexism and the ways of women in the world and abuse and stuff like that, I thought Bandit Queens did a really good job. I was not, again, completely satisfied with it, but I was really impressed with it. And it's another author who's a debut that I'm really excited for where she's going to go, how she's going to go, and all of these things. And I really have just fond memories. It's one of those books that's incredibly entertaining, but also incredibly nuanced, and I think especially the depiction of abuse and how abuse kind of changes our mindsets, and kind of there's a scene in which one of the people who's being abusive calls someone else abusive by being like, you know, abuse isn't just violence, it's also words. And in this context, the person is trying to like isolate and eradicate a friendship to be more controlling, and yet they're using the use of abuse in there. And that's a lot of use and abuse in that sentence, but I think that it does have really brilliant depictions of that. I think that I would prefer a book that is focused on female friendship to have like less girl hate in it. However, I do think that it also addresses the fact that there is internalized misogyny, and sometimes women will take on those kind of roles in order to feel like they have to do that to get ahead. And it's a really good book. The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell is also a really good book. For me, Bandit Queens and The Marriage Portrait are pretty much on the same level. They could be interchangeable in any way. And I think that this is a really brilliant book. It also deals with abuse and stuff like this. And it deals with Lucrezia de Amici growing up and her coming of age as a woman, when also looking at different chapters of her as an adult. She's 16, dealing with the fact that her husband is about to kill her and what does this mean and stuff like that. This also looks at characters that are abusive and also very kind in different moments, and it also looks at this idea of Janus, the Greek god, and how he has these two faces and we never know which one is coming. And again, I think it's a really good depiction of this. And I think that everyone thinks that this is going to be on the shortlist, but I think that Hamnet has been considered a much better book. I haven't actually read it yet, but I've heard it is much better like done and does a lot of these themes in different ways. So I don't think that it will be on the shortlist. I think that there has never been a repeat winner of the Women's Prize, and I don't think that this is a book that's going to take it. So even though it's a fantastic book that I really do recommend, I do think that even though it looks at this really toxic marriage and the ways in which this is, not many of the other secondary characters are actually given much of a voice or much characters. They are more tools of the plot or tools of different things or tools of her, like they maybe give her affection or give her hate, but they don't actually have a lot of life beyond themselves. So even though Lucretia has relationships, I actually can't imagine any of the characters outside of a scene with her. And I do think that that really hinders the novel as a whole. And now for the two books that I really enjoyed off the shortlist that I've read, and that is Stonebind by Natalie Haynes. I think that this is a fantastic novel. This looks at the story of Medusa and looks at the ways in which her characters and her story is told, and part of it is narrated by the snakes on her head, which I think is fantastic. And we have Athena and we have Zeus and we have Metis and we have Hera and all of these characters that are interacting in these stories, and I think it's like such a great book. I really enjoyed the humor and the way that it's told and the playing with Greek mythology. I know a lot of people kind of crap on Greek mythology. I'm a huge Greek mythology thing. Like, look at my Percy Jackson books. These are the reasons why I'm here as a reader. So, you know, I wear my, you know, inspirations on the sleeve. But I do think that this is a fantastic book, and I do think that though it might be looked down on in the canon, etc., I do think that it would deserve a very strong collection on the Women's Prize shortlist. The last and final book, and this book is like so many waves and levels and elevators just above everything else that, like, if it was not on the shortlist, I would be devastated beyond compare. So I'm personally devastated because I like filmed my entire talking about how much I love Wandering Souls, and my camera crashed and like lost it all. So I'm just gonna try to get into the vibe again because I love this book so much. But this is Wandering Souls. I really love it. It's by Cecile Pin, and it is a book that is looking at these family after the Vietnamese War, and it's set beginning in 1979, and it looks at this oldest sister especially, and she is named Anne, and she is a character that has to take on a huge motherly role because her parents decided it would be easier to get in if they're not all together. So she and her two next oldest brothers go to Hong Kong and they make it, and the rest of the family does not. So her parents, her and her four youngest siblings do not make it, and we have this story of them in Hong Kong in refugee centers, and also going to England and their story there, and the experience of her sacrificing and being a mother, and her experience of how hard it is for her because she has to sacrifice so many of her dreams and so much of her independence and her childhood because of the fact that she has to take on this role. And she talks about how, you know, she will listen to her brothers and stuff like that, but they can't really afford to see her as anything fragile, so she has to be so strong. And because of this, and because of the like manual labor that she does, she doesn't learn as much English, and she doesn't learn as many chances to advance in England. And yet her next brother is the one who, you know, he's old enough that he still retains his accent and still retains all of these things, so he becomes very jaded by it. And the youngest brother is the brother who can dream, who has so many dreams and believes that he can do all these things and fits in the most with the society. And it's such an interesting ways in which these characters that are not even that far apart, but how the transition affects them. Just supposing these scenes, we have these scenes of this island and different parts of the world now that had these atrocities that happened and yet are kind of standing as memorials that are no longer talked about. And we specifically see this island in which these Chinese sailors captured many of the boats and took the men, murdered them, and took the women and assaulted them. It really looks at these stories and how they're not represented and not told. And then we also have the story of their younger brother who did not survive and is living this life and looking at them and looking as a ghost as a 7-year-old and all of these things. And it's really, really poignant at the growth and development. And then we have this fourth voice that really looks at this writing, and one of the things that she says over and over again is like, how do I tell this story? She talks about how she could go into the macabre and tell about every gruesome detail, or she'd go into the fairy tale and make it this like wonderful, you know, the land of dreams kind of adventure. And how do you tell both joy and sorrow, and how do you not dramatize it but also say the amount of suffering that happens? And we go all the way into present day. Kind of the story mostly takes place in, you know, the 1980s, early 1990s, but it's just such a powerful story. And I would be really, really devastated if it was not shortlisted. And if it won, I would be really happy, because I think it deserves to win out of all of the books that I have read. Because I've not read Fire Rush, Homesick, Children of Paradise, Pod, Demon Copperhead, and Black Butterflies. So yeah, I think for my personal list of what I think I would like to see or believe would be put on the lawn list would be Wandering Souls, Stone Blind, The Bandit Queen's Marriage Portrait, I'm a Fan, and then either Cursed Bread or Glory. I think that both of them are very, I really, really like Glory. I just would love another book to see it. And Cursed Bread, I have such interesting thoughts, but I kind of want to discuss it further. Pretty much every list says that Demon Copperhead and The Marriage Portrait is going to make it onto the shortlist, and I really don't think both of them are going to get it. Both of them are by previous winners. Barbara Kinzover won it in 2010, and Maggie O'Farrell won it in 2020. So I especially don't think that Maggie O'Farrell is going to be shortlisted, simply because everyone assumes and talks about how The Marriage Portrait is not quite as good as Hamnet, and Hamnet won. The prize is 27 years old and has never had a repeat winner, so I think that this is not going to be the book 3 years apart that's going to win. And I am interested. I do think that Demon Copperhead, based on how much people love it, it could be the book that does it. And it has been 13 years, so it has been quite a while. I don't know if they want previous winners to win, because, like, you know, this whole prize is about celebrating women and how women are often not as shot forward and not as presented and stuff like that. And I think that maybe repeat prize winners also doesn't allow the like thing of like kind of uplifting other women's voices. Like Demon Copperhead has had that, although obviously we have other shortlisted and winners shortlisted before, so it's not like they don't recognize it and stuff like that. My biggest thing though, why I don't think that this is going to be the winner despite everyone loving it, is it does seem to me that they tend to kind of just pizzazz the winners of the prize. What I mean by that is that we have Hamnet, and then we have Piranesi, and then we have the Book of Form and Emptiness. Hamnet is this, you know, 16th century book about feminism and, you know, retelling Shakespeare's story but through his wife and without his name and stuff like that. We have Piranesi, who is a fantasy novel, and then we have the Book of Form and Emptiness, which is a like really long form book about all of these things. I actually haven't read it, so I can't actually talk about it. I haven't read all of these, but the first two I really do want to read, and they've been on my list since they came out, and yet somehow I haven't read them yet. But I really feel like going from the Book of Form and Emptiness, that is this like massive book by this well-established author, might not be what happens. I feel like they might feel like they're too similar and stuff. Both of them are also stories about boys in, you know, women's prize thing. I don't know, like obviously it could go together, but it does seem, looking back and forth, that we often have a fantasy win or something that's a little more, you know, less traditional, and then a book that is more like a straightforward narrative or something like that. And I think that we are often seeing a prize that, you know, doesn't just celebrate literary fiction or doesn't just celebrate like very straightforward historical fiction or something like that. So I think that it could go to a book that's a little more out there rather than that. Although the Book of Form and Emptiness did play with ghosts and I think talking books and stuff like that. So like maybe we will do something more straightforward. I don't know. I really don't know. The other thing that I wanted to say is that the last time a debut author won was in 2016, and it has a very high level amount of debut authors. I do really think that it could go to a debut author because of that. The judges obviously want to reward and to highlight debut authors. I think that if they do a huge job of recognizing and supporting debut authors and then they reward it to one of the most well-established female authors in the game, it feels kind of weird, unless they're kind of like, we're gonna make her win, so let's like celebrate a lot of other authors. I don't know, like obviously it can go as it is if you have well-established authors winning, but she's already had her chance of winning, so will she have her chance of winning again? Who knows? A lot of people don't like Stoneblind, but A Thousand Ships was shortlisted before, and I read Stoneblind, loved it, read Pandora's Jar, which is a great nonfiction book by her, loved it, and then I started A Thousand Ships, and I was like probably up on the hype and stuff like that, and I just couldn't get into it. I DNF'd it shortly after. I will get back to it as a soft DNF. However, I think that if that book was shortlisted, I think Stoneblind is a phenomenal book and looks at a lot of these things. And so much of this looks at retelling and stories and stuff like that, which again is very evident in both A Marriage Portrait and Demon Copperhead, which is everyone's darlings. But I feel like so many of these books really work really well as a long list, and they're very, very thematic. To me personally, I would love to see Wandering Souls win because I think that it's such a strong book and looks at all of these elements. But what I'm going to predict as the long list, I feel like every year you see people have like, these are the books that are sure going to be on the short list, or these are the books that are sure going to win, and they're not even on the short list. So I don't know, I am not going to go with the huge things. I do think that Bandit Queens is going to be on it. I think that it's a phenomenal book. I do think that this means that Glory is not going to make it, because I think that Bandit Queens and Glory both have the similar kind of jokey, kind of irreverent part of joking about social orders and about social hierarchy when also constructing and talking about feminism. So I don't see them both on the list, and I do think the Bandit Queens hasn't had its chance and is by a debut author and could really just have it pushed through. I also think I'm a Fan is a huge thing. I could see it not coming. I do feel like this seems like the pick that is like nobody is talking about this, or like a book about social media and obsession about all these things. It feels very modern on this list, and I feel like that's an important representation of a list that is like trying to curate an idea and stuff like that. And it's looking at stories, but in rather than a retelling, it's looking at the modern way and about how we interact with ourselves and how we present ourselves online. And I think that's really interesting. I could definitely see Cursed Bread on it for this reason as well. I think that people who chose these books like a certain kind of book, and I feel like this one goes, and it's kind of weird and obsessed with all of these things. This is a book that I'm like the least sure about, but it also just seems really weird and in a way that they might like. Again, I'm going to choose Wandering Souls because it has to be there. And then I do think that Demon Copperhead will probably get shortlisted. I don't think it's going to win, but you know, they might consider winning. They don't decide who's going to win when they decide the shortlist and stuff. And then I think Fire Rush could obviously be a pick. I also think that Black Butterflies could be a pick. You know, I think that many of these books could come in and out as that, oh, I don't have Stoneblind on my predictions. I don't know if Stoneblind is going to make it. You know, my predictions, you know, I said like these were my specific predictions and then I want to put everyone on it. But I do think, yeah, if I'm going to do it, Bandit Queens, I'm a Fan, Cursed Bread, Wandering Souls, Demon Copperhead, and Fire Rush. Fire Rush I'm not as sure about. It could be so many books. But I feel like Fire Rush is a good representation, and again, is retelling a person's kind of story and stuff like that, and it's quite well beloved. And yeah, that is my predictions. I'm not even quite sure in them, but I would love to hear what you think, what your thoughts are. Are you totally disagreeing with me? Am I just being dramatic and, you know, fighting Demon Copperhead for no apparent reason? I will read it. I will probably read it whether it is shortlisted or not. I do think that it's going to be shortlisted, but I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Follow for the reveal. I will hopefully be filming myself revealing, and I've definitely had those moments where I'm like, oh goodness, this is crazy. So yeah, we're going to see this, and I'll talk to you next time, which will be tomorrow.